There are moments in life when a single look or a single word decides whether you will stand tall or fall forever. The Horizon Airways Flight 119 sat quietly on the Los Angeles runway, its body shimmering golden under the burning red sunset. Inside the first-class cabin, everything gleamed, refined, a world apart, where wealth, privilege, and judgmental glances intertwined in the air. Marcus Langston boarded with a steady, composed stride. A charcoal suit hugged his upright frame, each step producing a soft thud against the thick carpet. No flashy jewelry, no boastful airs. Only a confidence etched deep into every movement, the kind that money could never buy. But just as he stepped into the cabin, a cold voice sliced through the air. "Seems like they'll let just about anyone up here now, huh?" Vanessa Creed, the chief flight attendant, stood at the front of the cabin, her uniform pristine to the point of chill. Her icy blue eyes skimmed over Marcus, a gaze as sharp as an invisible knife slicing through the room. A faint chuckle came from a passenger behind him. A woman clutched her designer handbag a little tighter. Marcus paused for half a beat, then simply smirked, the kind of poise honed through countless years in the trenches of business. He extended his boarding pass where the name Langston Marcus, Seat 1B, was printed boldly. Vanessa took the ticket between two fingers, as if holding something dirty, and held it up to the light. "Seems off," she said casually, though the undercurrent of malice was sharp enough to draw blood. The scanner beeped. A soft green flash. Valid. Unwilling to accept it, Vanessa demanded another scan. Beep! Valid again. The cabin held its breath. Eyes pierced into Marcus, waiting to see how this outsider would react. A man in a pinstripe suit whispered to his companion, "Probably won a prize ticket." An elderly woman with pearl earrings pressed her lips tight, eyeing him warily. But Marcus didn't flinch. "Scanned twice already," he said evenly, his voice as deep and steady as a drumbeat. "I believe that's sufficient." Vanessa's mouth tightened. Finally, she gave a curt nod. "Go on." Marcus nodded politely, moving forward. No complaints, no retorts. But he understood. The chessboard had been quietly set. He gently opened the overhead bin, empty, and lifted his high-end leather suitcase. Instantly, Vanessa's voice cut through the air again, sharp as a blade. "Please keep your luggage under your seat. New policy." Marcus looked straight at her, then glanced up. The overhead compartments were nearly empty. "Plenty of space. Doesn't matter. Flight safety," Vanessa snapped, slamming the compartment shut with a loud crack that made the entire cabin jump. The tension wound itself even tighter. Marcus, calm as stone, lowered his suitcase and rested it on his lap. No resistance, no argument. Only his straight-backed posture and quiet, unshakable gaze. Brief, heavy silence. A middle-aged man in a linen shirt stumbled into the cabin, dragging a battered suitcase. "Sorry, I'm late." Vanessa immediately smiled warmly, accepted his suitcase, and lovingly placed it into the very overhead bin she had forbidden Marcus from using. Marcus merely smirked. That new policy, it seemed, applied only to those they didn't want welcomed. Have you ever swallowed injustice just to preserve your dignity? If you have, comment "I understand" under this video. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Let's spread stories of justice together. The airplane doors closed. The engines rumbled low and deep. The cabin lights dimmed, bathing everything in a warm, golden glow. Marcus leaned back in his seat, the heavy suitcase still across his lap. He told himself, just stay silent. Endure a little. The storm will pass. But he was wrong. Silent tension builds, developing character psychology. In the small galley at the back, Vanessa leaned close to a younger colleague, whispering, "It's fine. He won't last long." The younger attendant forced a tight smile, avoiding Vanessa's eyes. The cabin air grew heavier. Marcus opened his eyes slightly. He didn't need to see Vanessa to feel the hostility pressing in around him. "Eee!" tightened his grip on the seatbelt, preparing for a battle he didn't yet know was about to begin. Do you think Marcus should continue to endure, or should he fight back? Comment "fight back" or "endure" below. And don't forget to follow us to see what Marcus chooses to do in the hours ahead. When injustice doesn't come with a scream, but with a polite smile, what will you do? Stay silent and endure, or prepare for an underground war. The airplane engines rumbled like war drums beneath the floor. Horizon Airways. Flight 119's first-class cabin was bathed in soft golden lights, the scent of champagne thickening the air of silent privilege. Marcus Langston leaned back into his seat, his suitcase resting heavily on his lap. Marcus said nothing. He accepted the napkins, dabbing at the coffee stain with slow, deliberate movements, almost ritualistic in their control. He knew. Any reaction, a curse, a frown, would be twisted into further ammunition against him. The plane tilted gently, settling into cruising altitude. The murmurs around him faded into a thick, unpleasant wall of sound as Vanessa strolled off with her service cart, her heels tapping rhythmic beats against the carpet, each step drumming against Marcus's fraying nerves. Marcus adjusted his seat. He did not react. He understood. The true victor is not the one who strikes first, but the one who waits patiently for their opponent to stumble over their schemes. Time crawled by, slow and oppressive, like moving through heavy glass. Vanessa passed by several times, brushing close to Marcus each time, her every motion a subtle taunt. Still, he remained motionless, his gaze fixed out the window, ignoring the increasingly louder whispers behind him. A man from first class, the same pinstripe-suited man who had sneered earlier, strolled down the aisle. He leaned in, whispered something into Vanessa's ear, and the two shared a fleeting glance toward Marcus. Minutes later, Vanessa approached again, clipboard pressed protectively against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Langston," she began sweetly, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear, "we have received a complaint that you threatened another passenger. For the safety of everyone on board, we must ask you to move to the back of the aircraft." The cabin erupted into murmurs. Passengers twisted in their seats to stare at Marcus, their eyes brimming with judgment. A woman clutching her tiny dog whispered, "I knew it." Trouble from the start. Marcus rose from his seat, not hurried, not angry. He pulled out his phone, which he had discreetly set to record once the attacks began, and held it up, his voice cutting through the tension. "I have recorded the entire interaction. If anyone has proof that I have been disruptive, please speak up now." The cabin fell into stunned silence. The pinstripe-suited man froze, avoiding Marcus's gaze. Vanessa's face stiffened, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. No one spoke. Not a single accusation was uttered. Marcus calmly returned to his seat, his cold gaze sweeping across the cabin, branding every face into memory. The click of his seatbelt fastening echoed sharply, a silent declaration that he would not fall easily. Soon after, the cabin lights dimmed and the seatbelt signs blinked off. The heavy atmosphere began to dissipate. But around Marcus, suspicion still hung thick in the air. Vanessa didn't return. She floated about the front of the cabin, always avoiding Marcus's gaze, as if she feared that a single look might expose her. Marcus relaxed slightly, but he remained vigilant. He knew. The coffee accident was just the opening salvo. The false accusation had been only a trial run. Vanessa wasn't finished, not after she had invested this much effort into trying to humiliate him. He closed his eyes. In the muted darkness of the economy cabin, he calculated. The recording would serve as evidence if needed. He could have his lawyers demand compensation, even sue the airline, but he understood. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was about honor. And honor, once smeared in front of hundreds of witnesses, needed more than evidence to cleanse. The plane continued slicing through layers of cloud, each slight dip a reminder for Marcus to be patient. The perfect moment to strike back had not yet arrived. He needed Vanessa to walk deeper into her trap, so when he moved, there would be no escape for her. A young flight attendant, the same one Marcus had noticed giggling earlier, hesitated as he passed by. The boy's eyes flicked toward Marcus, uncertainty written all over his face. Marcus caught the glance and gave a slight, silent nod. Maybe, just maybe, not everyone here was blind. Maybe there was still someone willing to stand witness. All he needed was a single crack in the wall of silence, and the truth would flood out like a dam bursting. Marcus leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes once again, gathering strength for the long battle ahead. In the silent darkness, the recorder inside, his jacket pocket, continued ticking, an unseen witness no one could silence. The low rumble of the engines vibrated through the metal skin of the airplane, a muted growl of restrained fury. Marcus Langston opened his eyes as the sensation passed through him, his chest tightening slightly. What awaited him wasn't peace, but an underground storm, quietly gathering momentum above the clouds. At the front of the cabin, Vanessa Creed was whispering animatedly to a small group of passengers. She didn't need to lower her voice much. Just a few scattered phrases were enough to spread like a virus inside the sealed atmosphere of the plane. Non-compliant. Suspicious behavior. Potential danger. Marcus didn't need to hear every word to understand. He had seen this brand of silent denunciation before. No evidence required, no logic necessary. Just plant a seed of doubt, and the crowd would nurture it into a raging wildfire all on its own. The whispers swept down the rows like a toxic breeze. A middle-aged man glanced at Marcus and shook his head in subtle judgment. A young mother clutched her sleeping baby closer, as if shielding herself. Even the young flight attendant, who had earlier glanced at Marcus with hesitation, now avoided his gaze, focusing intently on pushing his service cart down the aisle. Marcus sat upright, both hands resting calmly on his thighs, his eyes fixed straight ahead. He knew. A single wrong move, a misplaced glance, could ignite the tinderbox of fear and suspicion. The plane glided through a thick layer of clouds, shuddering slightly. Some passengers tightened their seatbelts. Others looked around, seeking reassurance in the eyes of strangers. In the heavy air filled with the scent of sweat, reheated meals, and invisible fear, Marcus became the magnet for everyone's apprehension. The man in the pinstripe suit, the same who had earlier whispered to Vanessa, stood up, stretching theatrically. He strolled casually down the aisle, pretending to limber up, but his eyes never left Marcus. As he passed, he coughed pointedly, a manufactured sound loud enough to draw attention. "He's been acting strangely since he boarded," the man said, his voice pitched in a half-whisper, half-proclamation. Heads began to nod. An uneasy consensus started to form. No convincing needed, just repetition. A woman nearby, her voice trembling slightly, said, "Should we inform the crew? I have a child on board." The pinstripe man eagerly nodded. "We should. For everyone's safety." Marcus gripped the armrest, his fingers flexing just enough to stop his knuckles from whitening. He had read about scenes like this. But living through the contagious spread of fear and prejudice in real time was a chilling, visceral experience. A man from the opposite aisle rose and hurried toward the galley. Minutes later, Vanessa returned, her face now a carefully constructed mask of grave concern, as if she were acting under duress, compelled to act for the common good. "Mr. Langston," she said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear, "for the safety of the flight, we ask you to move to a seat at the rear of the plane." Marcus lifted his gaze and met hers, cold, razor-sharp. He knew. If he resisted, he would step right into the trap they had laid. If he complied silently, he would surrender another piece of his dignity. He unfastened his seatbelt deliberately, stood up, retrieved his suitcase from under his seat, and faced Vanessa calmly. "I request to speak with the captain," he said, his voice low but carrying clearly. A frozen silence gripped the cabin. Vanessa blinked, unprepared for this response. But quickly, as someone used to manipulating situations, she shook her head. "The captain is occupied. We have the authority to reassign seats in the interest of flight safety." Marcus tipped his chin slightly. "Then please note it in the flight report. Passenger relocated without valid cause." "I am willing to sign the acknowledgement." Vanessa stiffened. For the first time, the murmuring wasn't solely directed at Marcus. It now edged uncertainly around Vanessa. The steely certainty in Marcus's demeanor sowed seeds of doubt among the watching crowd. Vanessa clenched her jaw, lowering her voice to a saccharine whisper. "You're obstructing crew operations. If you continue, security will be waiting upon landing." Marcus didn't flinch. His gaze held no defiance, no plea, only a steady, unwavering presence that unsettled everyone around him. After a long, tense beat, Vanessa retreated a step, her voice falsely sweet and brittle. "Very well. Please remain seated and refrain from further disturbance." Marcus sat down without a word, refastened his seatbelt, and pulled his suitcase close. His eyes swept over the peeking faces behind the seatbacks, faces filled with confusion, concern, and something else. Something Vanessa hadn't anticipated. Doubt. He knew. The first cracks had appeared in the wall of lies, and with enough patience, the entire false narrative Vanessa had built would crumble. The plane cruised steadily through the grim gray sky, buffeted gently by pockets of turbulence. The cabin's heavy tension didn't ease. But now it wasn't just Marcus who bore its weight. It had begun to settle, heavily, silently, on Vanessa Creed. The plane pierced through the gray cloud layers, leaving torn streaks of atmosphere in its wake. Inside the cabin, the air thickened into an invisible liquid, heavy and suffocating over every seat. Marcus Langston sat still, his hand resting lightly on the polished leather of his suitcase. The coffee stain had dried into dark, blotchy patches on his expensive trousers, but he no longer cared about appearances. This battle was no longer about a stained suit. It had escalated into a war for dignity, identity, and the right to exist in a world where people like Vanessa Creed believed they had the authority to judge. Vanessa had disappeared into the crew area for some time. Marcus didn't need to see her to know. She was plotting her next move. She would never retreat after a mere stumble. Sure enough, within 10 minutes, the cabin speakers crackled to life. But instead of a standard announcement, a voice rang out with deliberate clarity. "Attention passengers. As part of our internal safety protocol, we will be conducting a random inspection of carry-on luggage in row 9. Thank you for your cooperation." A ripple of murmurs spread throughout the cabin. Several passengers turned their heads to glance at Marcus, their eyes filled with a cheap, hungry anticipation and vague, growing fear. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment. No one believed in so-called random checks. The target was as clear as day. The crew door swung open. Vanessa led two other flight attendants down the aisle, white gloves in hand and portable scanners at the ready. Vanessa stopped in front of Marcus, her voice sweet as syrup, her eyes cold as ice. "Apologies, sir. May we kindly ask you to open your bag for a quick inspection? It won't take long." Marcus lifted his head, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Before I comply," he said, his voice calm but ringing through the thick air, "I would like a specific explanation for why my luggage is being inspected." One of the two male attendants glanced nervously at Vanessa. Without blinking, she replied smoothly, "Random inspection. New company policy." Marcus smirked faintly. He stared straight at her, his voice as steady as flowing water. "Random? Funny how I'm the only one chosen." Vanessa shrugged, her smile brittle. "Please cooperate or we'll have to report non-compliance with flight safety regulations." Marcus understood exactly what that meant. Being labeled uncooperative on a flight could tarnish his record permanently. The perfect excuse to brand him a threat to airline security. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Vanessa's. "Fine," he said in a low, deliberate tone, "but I will be recording the entire inspection." No one answered. Marcus pulled out his phone, activated the recorder, and placed it openly on the tray table, then slowly unlatched his suitcase. Inside were meticulously arranged documents, papers crucial for a corporate merger worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a backup laptop, a few personal items, and a neatly folded spare suit. One of the attendants donned gloves and began searching. He flipped through papers, opened every zipper, and patted down every pocket. Marcus remained perfectly still, his gaze unblinking. Vanessa stood nearby, pretending to scan the cabin, but her eyes flicked constantly toward the suitcase, hoping, yearning, to find something incriminating. When the search was complete, the attendant looked up and shook his head at Vanessa. "Nothing unusual," he murmured. Vanessa's mouth tightened for a split second before she masked it with a saccharine smile. "Thank you for your cooperation, sir," she said, then turned sharply, leaving Marcus with a disrupted, disheveled suitcase. Marcus calmly reassembled his belongings. Every movement is precise and deliberate. He knew a single slip, a single outburst, could hand them the weapon they craved. The cabin's murmurs rose again, but this time Marcus caught something new in their tone. Uncertainty. Hesitation. Not everyone was buying into Vanessa's narrative anymore. The plane began its slow descent. The seatbelt sign dinged overhead. The cabin lights flickered. Flight attendants moved down the aisles, checking passenger seatbelts. Marcus closed his eyes, drawing in a deep, steady breath. The first battle was over. He hadn't won, but he hadn't lost either. He knew Vanessa wouldn't stop. Someone like her, once she set her sights on destroying someone, would use every dirty trick she could find. But now Marcus was ready. He had the recordings. He had silent witnesses, the phone, capturing every damning second. And more importantly, he had something Vanessa could never predict. The patience of a man who understood that to tear down a liar, you didn't need to scream. You only needed to wait, and they would trip over their deceit. The plane glides lower, slicing through the thick silver clouds, preparing to land. Marcus tightened his grip on his suitcase. The real game had only just begun. The airplane's wheels screeched against the tarmac as Horizon Airways Flight 119 touched down. A small jolt traveled through Marcus Langston's body, but he showed no reaction. The cabin lights flickered from amber to pale white. The signal for all passengers to remain seated, seatbelts fastened. The Boeing 787 rolled along the runway, decelerating steadily. Outside the window, the Denver tarmac shimmered under the cold, harsh glare of yellow floodlights. Marcus tightened his grip on his suitcase handle, his gaze sharp as a blade locked onto the galley, where Vanessa Creed clustered with several flight attendants. She threw him a glance, her lips pressed into a tight line. Frustration radiated from every tense movement she made. Marcus knew. The failed luggage inspection had cost Vanessa face in front of the entire cabin. She wouldn't back down easily, and he sensed that the next move would be rougher and far more dangerous. The aircraft vibrated gently as it turned onto the taxiway. An announcement crackled overhead. "Welcome to Denver. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop." Marcus inhaled deeply, bracing himself. It took exactly 3 minutes. The cabin intercom buzzed, and this time Vanessa's voice came through, cold, stripped of any pretense of politeness. "Attention passengers, we have identified a minor technical issue involving seating equipment in row 9. For your safety, we will be conducting an immediate inspection. Passengers in row 9, please remain seated." A manufactured technical issue. Marcus narrowed his eyes. This wasn't an accident. It was a trap. The cabin door opened. 2 airport security officers, dressed in Navy uniforms and white gloves, boarded the plane with grim expressions. Vanessa led them directly to Marcus. "Here," she said, pointing to Marcus's seat. "We suspect signs of tampering with safety equipment." Marcus remained seated, his head tilting slightly to observe. Tampering with safety equipment. A serious accusation in civil aviation. Even a suspicion could blacklist a passenger permanently from flying. One of the security officers, the taller of the two, spoke. "Sir, may we inspect your seat?" Marcus nodded, calmly unfastening his seatbelt and rising to his feet. He stepped back, his eyes flicking briefly to his phone, still recording. The officer crouched, inspecting the seat. He tugged the tray table, checked the seatbelt, and examined the bolts and fastenings. Suddenly he paused. A small loose bolt was wedged between the seats. Vanessa immediately surged forward, her voice high-pitched with manufactured alarm. "There! I reported it earlier. The seat shows clear signs of tampering." Marcus looked at the bolt, his expression unchanged. The setup was laughably crude. Loosening a seat bolt mid-flight without drawing attention was impossible, and Marcus had only left his seat once, for a 2-minute restroom break. The second security officer frowned. "Sir, do you have any explanation?" Marcus answered evenly. "This aircraft underwent a thorough inspection before departure. If there was an issue, it existed before I boarded. I was assigned this seat by the chief flight attendant. I had no choice. At no point did I interfere with the seat structure." He held out his phone. "I've been recording continuously since I was ordered to change seats. I'm willing to provide the recording." The 2 officers exchanged glances. One of them nodded. "Please retain the recording, sir. Do not delete it." Vanessa stiffened visibly. She hadn't expected Marcus to remain this composed. One of the officers continued the inspection, checking nearby seats, and uncovered something critical. 3 other bolts were also loose. Not just Marcus's seat. The entire section. A detail Vanessa hadn't accounted for. The senior officer turned to her. "Chief Flight Attendant, where is the pre-flight safety checklist for this seating area? Was it cleared before departure?" Vanessa hesitated. "A beat too long." I'll need to verify with the maintenance team," she stammered. Marcus seized the moment. He said calmly, "I recommend reviewing the cabin surveillance footage. Horizon Airlines has continuous monitoring on international flights. If someone tampered with the seats, the cameras would have recorded it." The suggestion dropped like a hammer. Vanessa paled visibly. She knew full well the surveillance was active, and that its evidence would be irrefutable. The officer nodded and radioed the technical team. No one spoke during the long, suffocating minutes that followed. Only the faint clatter of luggage carts outside the plane and the heavy breathing of those clinging desperately to their collapsing narrative filled the silence. Finally, the radio crackled. Review of pre-flight logs. No reported faults in row 9 before departure. Review of surveillance footage. No passenger tampering detected during flight. The report was clear, damning, a death knell for Vanessa Creed. Marcus stood tall, his gaze placid, as serene as still water. The lead officer turned back, his voice ice-cold. There is no evidence that Mr. Langston tampered with any equipment. The incident will be formally investigated according to protocol. Flight crew is instructed to file a technical incident report. Vanessa clenched her clipboard so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Marcus calmly retrieved his suitcase, gliding past her as if she no longer existed. The cabin was silent. Passengers sneaked glances at Marcus. But now their eyes were no longer filled with judgment. They shimmered with doubt. And unease directed not at him, but at the ones who had tried to make him the villain. The plane had come to a complete stop. Passengers began rising, pulling their luggage from overhead bins. Marcus waited until the aisle cleared before standing. No rush, no panic. The battle wasn't over yet, but today, once again, Marcus Langston had walked through the filthiest of traps, untouched. Marcus Langston stepped out of the narrow aircraft aisle, his suitcase gliding behind him in a perfectly straight line across the carpet. Passengers fanned out along the jet bridge, a few sneaking glances at him, their expressions hesitant rather than hostile. He paid them no mind. Crowds could be easily swayed, but just as easily lost when the truth began to crack through the surface. As Marcus reached the doorway, Vanessa Creed suddenly blocked his path. Her face was frozen cold, chin tilted upward, clipboard clutched like a flimsy shield. "Mr. Langston," she said, her voice stripped of fake sweetness, laced instead with rigid anger. "Please remain here. A new incident concerning your behavior has been reported." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his gaze sweeping over her with frosty detachment. "Another incident?" he asked, voice low and even. Vanessa inhaled sharply, raising her voice just enough to draw attention from the lingering passengers. "A second flight attendant has reported that you verbally threatened crew members during the flight. For everyone's safety, we are compelled to request airport security detain you for investigation." A fresh murmur rippled through the small crowd, gathered by the door. Marcus tightened his grip on his suitcase handle, his expression unchanging. He had anticipated this move the moment he heard those early whispers between Vanessa and the man in the pinstripe suit. This was a desperate move, and the most dangerous yet. Slowly, Marcus drew his phone from his jacket pocket. The recording app was still running. "I have a complete recording of the entire flight. From the moment I was asked to switch seats," Marcus said, his voice firm but not loud, just enough for everyone nearby to hear clearly. "If anyone would like to verify whether I made any threats, they are welcome to listen." A heavy silence fell. Even Vanessa faltered for half a heartbeat. An airport security officer stepped forward. He wore a gray uniform, his face stern but not hostile. "We'll need to review that recording, sir," the officer said. Marcus nodded, calmly opening the file in front of them. He played the recording over the speaker. "The unedited audio captures every exchange, the seat change, the luggage inspection, the loose bolts incident. All with Marcus's voice calm, steady, without a single harsh word, without a single threat." The officer listened intently, occasionally glancing at Vanessa. His expression grew increasingly grim. When the recording ended, Marcus added. His tone was steady as ever. Additionally, I request that the cabin surveillance footage be reviewed to substantiate all claims made against me. A new wave of whispers stirred the cramped jet bridge. But this time the murmurs were no longer fully against Marcus. Vanessa gripped her clipboard tightly. Her hand trembled, almost imperceptibly. But enough. Still, she tried to salvage. The recording could have been edited, she said stiffly. Marcus said nothing, merely handed the phone to the officer. The officer took it seriously, nodding curtly. We will submit this to digital forensics. If it's been altered, we'll know immediately. He then turned to Vanessa, his gaze sharpened. Additionally, we will request a review of the cabin surveillance footage. If your reports do not match the evidence, you will also be held accountable. Vanessa blanched. Marcus pulled his suitcase smoothly past her, walking out of the aircraft with his back straight and his pace deliberate, like a glacier moving through fire. No one stopped him now. As he exited the jet bridge, the airport floodlights struck him full on. The cold night air bit at his face, but it was fresher, cleaner than any breath he'd taken aboard that plane. Marcus knew it wasn't over. Vanessa wouldn't stop after one failed accusation. She had gone too far. There was no way back for her now. And people like that, when cornered, would do anything. He pulled out his phone and called Carla Reese, his attorney. Plan B, he said tersely. On the other end, Carla responded without missing a beat. Already in motion, Marcus ended the call, his eyes locked onto the illuminated facade of the terminal ahead. He wasn't just preparing to defend himself anymore. He was preparing to strike back. He knew Vanessa still had cards left to play. Maybe fabricated witness statements, maybe a media smear campaign, maybe even more serious accusations. But this time he wouldn't just parry. He would expose her completely. The plane had landed. The airport welcomed a fresh crowd of travelers. But beyond the glare of terminal lights, the war between Marcus Langston and Vanessa Creed had only just ignited. Like an ember in the dark, waiting for the wind to fan it into an unstoppable blaze. Outside Denver International Airport, the sky had darkened under the weight of heavy, swollen clouds. The streetlights along the exit lanes flickered on, their reflections shimmering across the damp pavement. Marcus Langston rolled his suitcase steadily across the concrete, each step heavy as stone. He didn't leave the airport immediately. Plan B, the one he and Carla had prepared, required him to stay nearby, because the next attack from Vanessa wouldn't come aboard the plane. It would hit the battlefield of public perception, and it came faster than he expected. Less than 30 minutes after stepping off the aircraft, Marcus's phone buzzed violently. A message from Carla flashed across the screen. It's starting. Marcus opened the news app. Right there on the home page, a blazing headline swallowed the screen. VIP passenger causes uproar on Horizon flight. Crew alleges threatening behavior. He scrolled through the article, scanning it swiftly. The piece described an unnamed passenger with a history of disruptive conduct, threatening flight attendants, and interfering with flight safety, citing an anonymous internal source. No names were mentioned, but the details leaked were enough for anyone following the earlier incident to know exactly who they were talking about. The attached photo was a grainy shot of Marcus dragging his suitcase through the terminal, his face half lit, half shadowed under harsh airport lights, snapped from a distance to make him appear sinister, blurred, almost menacing. Marcus quietly pocketed his phone. The anger didn't explode outward. It coiled inside him, smoldering beneath a shell of ice-cold logic. He immediately called Carla. "See it yet?" she said, skipping any greeting. She played the card we predicted. Prepare for counterstrike, Marcus replied curtly. Already executed 5 minutes ago, Carla said. The original audio recording has been sent to 3 major news outlets. Horizon's corporate communications office just received a formal demand for clarification. Now we wait for the truth to surface. Marcus nodded, though she couldn't see him. He trusted her. A good lawyer didn't just argue. They calculated timing like generals on a battlefield. He walked slowly toward the taxi pickup area. The airport roared with life, but inside his head there was only silence. The calm of a man standing in the eye of the storm, waiting for the hurricane's final wall to strike. About 20 minutes later, the counterstrike detonated. On the homepage of a reputable media outlet, a new article appeared, its headline short and devastating. Horizon Airways faces fabrication allegations. Audio recording reveals the full truth. The unedited recording, clear, intact, was attached to the article. Marcus's voice throughout, calm, steady, rational. A stark, irrefutable contrast to the threatening behavior alleged earlier. Social media erupted. The audio clip spread like wildfire. Users tore into Horizon Airways and the injustice served to an innocent passenger. Within an hour, the hashtag number sign, Justice for Marcus Langston, skyrocketed into the national trending charts. Marcus stood at the curb, airport taxis gliding past in rivers of blurred yellow light. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply tightened his grip on the suitcase, feeling the steady, deliberate drum of his heart. Victory never roared with trumpets. It arrived quietly, through persistence, through the steady endurance of filth and falsehoods. His phone buzzed again. Carla. Horizon just released a statement, she said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. They're distancing themselves from the original leak, promising a full internal investigation. Half the board of directors is demanding immediate suspension of the entire Flight 119 crew, pending inquiry. Marcus exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised. Vanessa had lost her last shield, institutional protection. Now she stood alone, exposed before the harsh light of truth. But Marcus knew. A cornered animal was most dangerous. Vanessa still had one card left, and if he intended to end this fully, he would have to strike the killing blow. He didn't head for his hotel as planned. Instead, he ordered the taxi to drive him straight to Horizon's local office in Denver. As the car weaved through endless strings of pale yellow streetlights, Marcus opened his laptop, accessing his old administrator account, privileges he still held thanks to his role as a strategic shareholder. He slipped into the internal HR database effortlessly, and he found it, a buried disciplinary file, tied directly to Vanessa Creed. 3 separate incidents were swept under the rug. 2 formal complaints from passengers alleging discrimination. 1 documented instance of tampering with flight safety reports. Marcus's fingers slid across the touchpad, opening each file like hammer blows, battering down the gates of secrecy. Vanessa wasn't some falsely accused model employee. She was a ticking time bomb, protected too long by a system that should have exposed her years ago. He archived everything, compressing it into a single encrypted package, then sent it to Carla with one instruction: release at 0 hour. Carla replied with just 2 words: standing by. When the taxi pulled up in front of Horizon's Denver office, Marcus stepped out, laptop tucked under one arm. Above him, the night sky sagged heavy and dark over the city, but inside him there was only the immovable certainty of granite. He was no longer the hunted. He was the storm that would end the game. The main lobby of Horizon's Denver office stood still under the bleak glow of gray-white lights. Marcus Langston pushed open the glass doors, the wheels of his suitcase slicing a sharp line across the polished floor. Night shift employees lifted their heads, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and confusion as they recognized him. The man plastered across headlines, social media feeds, and whispered through tense internal meetings like a ghost. Marcus said nothing. He strode straight to the reception desk, leaning casually against the cool glass. "I need to speak with the director of operations," he said, voice low and steady. The receptionist, a young woman with curly brown hairs, blinked in alarm, then hastily punched an internal number. The air stretched tight, vibrating like an overstrung violin string. 5 minutes later, a glass door swung open at the end of the corridor. A man in a dark tailored suit hurried toward him. Jonathan Reed, Horizon's Western Regional Director. His face was steel cold, his posture guarded. "Mr. Langston," Jonathan said stiffly, "we've received notice from legal about your request for documents." Marcus gave a slight nod. "I'm not here to request," he replied, placing his laptop on the counter. "I'm here to expose." Without another word, Marcus opened the laptop and navigated swiftly to a file labeled Internal Records, Vanessa Creed. He turned the screen toward Jonathan. The titles of each file flashed bright under the sterile lights: confidential meeting transcripts, passenger complaints, and internal reports Horizon had quietly buried over the years. Jonathan scanned the top entries, his face draining of color as he read. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "Strategic shareholder access," Marcus said coolly. "And before you ask, a second copy is already with my attorney. It's been sent to 3 major news agencies and 1 national broadcast network." Jonathan gripped the strap of his briefcase tightly. "What do you want?" he asked. Marcus closed the laptop slowly, locking eyes with him, steel against steel. "I want the full truth laid bare." Silence stretched between them like a loaded gun. Finally, Jonathan exhaled heavily, as if surrendering to a war he knew he couldn't win. "Follow me," he said. Marcus followed him down a long, sterile hallway and into a large third-floor conference room. Inside, 5 senior Horizon executives sat in grim silence. The air buzzed with unspoken fear. They had all seen the news. They all knew the stakes. Jonathan slid the laptop to the center of the table without explanation. It didn't need one. The executives leaned in, their expressions hardening as the documents spoke for themselves. At the head of the table sat Gerald Klein, acting chairman, a seasoned man with sharp silver hair. He tapped his fingers lightly against the polished wood. "Mr. Langston," Gerald began, his voice measured, "we understand the ordeal you've been subjected to. But let's be clear. How far are you prepared to take this?" Marcus crossed his arms calmly over his chest. "As far as it takes," he said evenly, "until every act of cover-up is exposed, until every accomplice faces accountability." The tension in the room tightened another notch. "And if we cooperate?" Gerald asked, his seasoned eyes narrowing. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "First, Horizon issues a formal public apology. Second, immediate suspension of the entire Flight 119 crew, pending independent third-party investigation. Third, full restoration of my shareholder privileges, public vindication of my name, and appropriate compensation." Gerald leaned back slowly in his chair, steepling his fingers thoughtfully. "And if we refuse?" Marcus smiled, a small, deadly smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The audio recordings, cabin surveillance footage, and internal files will be released within the hour, not just to the American media. International outlets are already standing by. You won't just be handling a domestic scandal. You'll be battling a global brand collapse." The room froze. One executive, a woman in a sharp blue suit, was the first to nod. "I support Mr. Langston's terms," she said firmly. One by one the others followed. Gerald exhaled heavily, defeat etched deep into the lines of his face. "We accept," he said. Marcus gave a curt nod. There was no gloating, no triumph flashing across his features. Real victory didn't come from applause. It came from weathering every storm, silently gathering the strength to bring down the lies when the time was right. As Marcus stood and pulled out his phone to signal Carla to halt the planned document release, the conference room door burst open. A pale-faced secretary rushed in. "Gentlemen," she stammered, "there's breaking news. Vanessa Creed has just been arrested by Denver police. Charges, obstruction of flight safety, and evidence tampering." The room stiffened, air evaporating in a heartbeat. Marcus gripped the handle of his suitcase a little tighter, his gaze cool and unreadable. The final blow had landed, and this time there would be no escape. Final chapter. The sky belongs to him. The news of Vanessa Creed's arrest spread like wildfire. Every major outlet raced to cover the largest scandal in Horizon Airways history. A chief flight attendant not only accused of falsely framing a passenger, but also of tampering with flight safety records, facing decades behind bars. Marcus Langston stood by the third-floor conference room window, gazing down at the sea of headlights in the parking lot. The familiar weight of his suitcase rested by his side, a silent witness to everything he had endured to reach this moment. The door clicked open behind him. Jonathan Reed entered, carrying a thick folder stamped "Confidential." He placed it on the table in front of Marcus, his former guarded demeanor now tinged with a rare hint of respect. "The press release you requested," Jonathan said. "Horizon formally apologizes, fully clears you of any misconduct, and pledges sweeping internal reforms." Marcus nodded, scanning the draft. Every word had been chosen with precision, not just clearing his name, but forcing Horizon to admit its systemic failures to the world. Beneath the statement was an attached settlement, $15 million in damages and full restoration of his shareholder status, now worth even more thanks to the groundswell of public support rallying behind Marcus. He signed without hesitation, one clean, final stroke of the pen. When the last line was inked, Marcus knew. This wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the end of an entire chapter of his life. Jonathan hesitated, then asked quietly, "Will you stay with Horizon?" Marcus lifted his eyes, calm and resolute. "No." Jonathan blinked, visibly taken aback. Marcus gathered the documents, sliding them into his briefcase with slow precision. "I no longer believe in a system that only acts when it's cornered. I'll build my own." Jonathan nodded slightly, not arguing. Somewhere in his guarded expression was a flicker of admiration. Marcus walked out of the building and into the cool Denver night. Overhead, the sky stretched wide and dark, but the clouds had lifted. Only the stars remained, steady and unyielding. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but this time he would set the terms. 1 week later, a press conference in New York City. Marcus Langston, now in a sharp black suit no longer marred by spilled coffee or whispered slander, stepped onto a brightly lit stage. Behind him shone a new logo, Sky Shield Aviation, a consulting and regulatory firm committed to protecting justice in every flight. He wasn't launching another airline. He was launching a new standard. "We've grown too accustomed to accepting negligence," Marcus said, his voice echoing clearly across the hushed crowd. "It's time we demand fairness, not just when it's convenient, but when it matters most. Because up in the skies, as in life, even the smallest crack can bring down giants." The room held its breath. Not a sound, only raw, focused trust in every pair of eyes watching him. A reporter raised her hand. "Any message for those who tried to destroy you?" Marcus smiled faintly, a real, unbitter smile. "I thank them," he said, "because they taught me that patience is not weakness, and justice, real justice, only exists because someone refuses to stay silent." Meanwhile, in the dim confines of Denver County Jail, Vanessa Creed huddled on a cold iron cot. A battered TV mounted high on the wall flashed news of Sky Shield Aviation's debut, Marcus Langston's name spoken with reverence. Vanessa dug her nails into her palms. Everything she had tried to hide, every dirty tactic she had deployed, now lay bare under the unforgiving spotlight. No one was buying her lies anymore. No one was coming to save her. A second news ticker rolled across the screen. Vanessa Creed faces 12 federal charges, potential sentence, 25 years. She collapsed against the wall, shoulders heaving, not from grief, but from despair. As twilight cloaked the Manhattan skyline, Marcus Langston stood on the balcony of his new headquarters. The setting sun set the city ablaze in gold and crimson. His phone buzzed. A call from Carla. "Good news," she said. "New investors just confirmed. We've already exceeded our financial goals for the next 3 years." Marcus smiled quietly, the first true smile in months. "This is only the beginning," he said. He ended the call and leaned on the railing, staring at the wide-open sky above. Sometimes to soar higher, you have to learn how to fall without breaking. Marcus Langston had fallen, and he had risen, not as a survivor, but as the architect of a new sky. Tonight he wasn't just a passenger. He owned the sky. Final message. The story of Marcus Langston. Through Marcus Langston's turbulent journey, we witness a raw but powerful truth. Justice is never given. It is earned through perseverance, the courage to stand alone and the wisdom to strike at the right moment. Marcus did not shout when he was insulted. He did not lash out when he was humiliated. He did not seek blind revenge when he was slandered and when an entire system seemed to turn against him. Instead, he quietly gathered every piece of evidence, every smallest detail, patiently turning each wound into a sharpened spear, transforming every attack into a stepping stone to shift the entire board. And in the end, Marcus Langston did not merely clear his name. He built a new standard, forcing a giant corporation to bow and change. Marcus's story reminds us, silence is not weakness, when it is the preparation for a smart, strategic counterattack. Patience is not submission, when your heart still burns with the fire of reclaiming justice. True strength does not lie in striking back out of anger, but in standing firm until your enemies collapse under the weight of their wrongdoing. Practical life lessons. Never underestimate the power of silent preparation. When facing injustice, document everything, because truth, though buried at times, will always be the sharpest weapon. Don't let anger destroy your strategic advantage. Outrage may satisfy you momentarily, but true victory demands cool heads, steady hands, and long-term vision. Never blindly trust the system. The rules don't always protect the righteous. When injustice comes, you must stand up for yourself. No one else will do it for you. Turn adversity into your greatest leverage. Marcus didn't stop at clearing his name. He built a new empire so that others wouldn't have to endure what he did. Your value doesn't come from how others treat you. It comes from how you choose to respond to adversity. And finally, no one can take the sky from you, if you are determined enough to build your wings.